Welcome to Series 3 of the Space Podcast, the place where we dive into the stories, voices and ideas shaping a more inclusive workplace at Gowling WLG. I'm your host, Emma Dennis, and in today's episode, we're exploring resilience, identity and reinvention. I'm joined by Greg Standing, who leads our risk management and insurance team, who has navigated his career whilst losing his hearing. We'll talk about how hearing loss impacted the career Greg had built as a commercial litigation partner, the emotional as well as physical journey, reinventing himself and the process of regaining lost confidence. We'll also discuss how his experiences have shaped his leadership values and what organisations can do to better support those who encounter disability later in life and career. This is a conversation about one's sense of oneself, what good looks like for you, and endeavouring to make the workplace a better place for future generations. So let's dive in. Hello, Greg. Welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, very welcome. Thank you for asking me.
Before we start to talk about wellbeing and disability, I wanted to find out a little bit more about your career in the firm. You're a solicitor and joined the firm as a newly qualified back when it was Rag & Co. back in 2000, and very quickly worked your way up to become an equity partner in 2008. Then, nearly a decade later, you retired from the partnership and began a new role as Head of Risk and Insurance in our General Counsel team. I wondered if you could tell me a little bit about your current role.
Sure. I feel very humble and privileged to do my current role. I feel very close to the inner workings of the firm, which is ironic, actually, because as a partner, you might assume that I felt that way then. But actually, in the role that I do now, it's very much all about keeping the firm safe and protected. And that's what the General Counsel team does. It's about managing risks, that impact on the firm's strategy, helping partners and people find solutions to problems. I feel really lucky to be able to say that I really enjoy my job, which is not something I've always said.
It's a good place to be, isn't it, when you can say you really enjoy what you do. Looking back, did you always know that you wanted to be a lawyer?
I definitely not know. I mean, I think one thing I've noticed is, sort of some people, it's all they've ever wanted to do is be a partner in a law firm, it seems, and that was definitely never me. I think like most little boys, when I was very young, I just wanted to be a footballer. You didn't really think too much about the future and what you're going to do. But I think looking back at school, I was always good at the essay subjects. I was a good writer. And I think as I got older with my A-level subjects, looking back, I didn't know it at the time, but I chose very analytical subjects like English literature and history. And I guess when you put all those things together, it was a bit of a natural calling, but I didn't realise that.
I mentioned in the introduction that you have hearing loss, and I wondered whether you could explain a little bit more about when and how you first started to notice changes in your hearing.
Sure. I mean, I wasn't born with hearing loss. In fact, I've lived more than half my life without it. My career was established. My sense of self-identity was established, as a fully hearing person. It was in my sort of early 30s that I started to notice that things weren't quite what they should be. At that time, I was probably 2 years into partnership. It was a difficult time to experience something like that. I started to struggle. Notice I was struggling in anything other than sort of perfect hearing conditions. I think anyway, with background noise, sitting at a distance from people. Really noticed it with very softly spoken females, much harder to hear than men. That was 10, 15 years ago. And, at the time, what was a mild hearing loss has now progressed to profound.
Yeah. And so with your hearing loss, it's not that you can't hear, is it more making sense of the sounds?
Yeah, very much so. Making sense of sound and speech is exactly how I try to explain to people, a common misperception with hearing loss that if you speak louder or shout, that someone will hear you, and it's very much not the case. In my own type of hearing loss, I've lost more of the higher frequencies than the lower frequencies. And it's the higher frequencies that enables you to hear consonants in sentences. Essentially, what you're not getting is the full spectrum of sounds. You're not getting every letter in a word. You're not getting all the words in a sentence. And so what you're doing is trying to piece together all the clues that you aren't getting. May not be very much verbally, but you're lip reading, you're picking up on body language, you're picking up on other clues, and you're performing mental gymnastics, if you like, sort of in real time, trying to make sense of everything.
That must be exhausting.
It is exhausting. I would say that's probably almost the hidden disability, the thing that's less obvious to people. People can see that you're struggling to hear sometimes. What people don't see, can't see, don't really understand is the exhaustion that goes alongside it.
And what was the process like for you in terms of realising that you were experiencing hearing loss and then getting a diagnosis and coming to terms with that?
Yeah, I mean, it was horrendous. Can't really dress it up in any other way. I already knew I was losing my hearing. I went to see a consultant just to get it confirmed, but he didn't tell me anything that I didn't already know. And he simply said, there's nothing we can do. You need to go and get yourself fitted with NHS hearing aids, and that was that. I think I went back to work straight after the appointment and just carried on as if nothing had happened. And inside I was falling apart a little bit.
I can't believe you just went back to work and carried on. Getting that diagnosis and realising what the situation was and then coming back to work, how did that then impact on your sort of confidence and sense of identity? And particularly, you mentioned you were a partner at the firm at this time.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, I think the bottom line was that I just found it very hard to accept. Perhaps I didn't want to accept it. Perhaps I had my blinkers on, and I suppose my learned response to adversity or problems was to just work harder. I think that was my learned approach, rightly or wrongly, to this situation. I just felt it was my problem to solve, and the way to solve it would be that I just needed to get my head down and get on with it and work harder. I've come to learn, looking back, there wasn't the time or space to process it at that time of your life, especially when you've just been made a partner. Life is a bit like a juggernaut, sort of hurtling forward at 100 miles an hour, and you're at the wheel. You don't feel like you can apply the brakes. You can't suddenly slow down and say, hold on a minute, I'm struggling a bit with this. I need any help. I had a young family. You have all the expectations that you have of providing for your family, expectations, rightly or wrongly, of your parents and of yourself, actually. You've worked very hard to put yourself in that position, and the thought that it could all unravel, it's pretty scary. It's pretty frightening.
Yeah. And how did it impact on you emotionally as well?
It was very emotional. I think the key thing I would say is that I tried to keep it to myself, so not show any emotion. Work, I tried to project an image of confidence and strength, when actually I felt anything but confident and strong. It went straight to my sense of self-identity. I felt ashamed, embarrassed, and suffered this quite catastrophic loss of confidence, but very much internalized those feelings. And as I say, carried on and tried to project to the world that I wasn't feeling that way.
Did you tell anybody at work?
I did. It was a sort of on a strictly need to know basis. I think the first person I told was my group leader. I told the other partner in my team. But I certainly didn't broadcast it to everybody. Was able, I think, to successfully hide it in many situations. I certainly felt it would be a weakness.
I think that's a good point you make about feeling like it would be a weakness. I think in the legal sector, there's this sort of, like you said, showing vulnerability is a very hard thing for people to do. So yeah, I completely hear what you're saying. What were some of the biggest challenges that you then faced in your role as a partner while you're managing this diagnosis and your hearing loss?
Well, the one thing I didn't lose was my brain. So if I may say so, I was still able to do the core job, solve legal problems for clients, and I think I was successful at that in many ways. But what I did lose was the ability to communicate confidently. And what I felt really held me back was that lack of confidence in effectively networking and building key relationships. And that was outside the firm, with clients and prospective clients, but also in the office, internal networking with colleagues and other partners. And I think that really is the lifeblood of of any successful partner. A lot of relationship building, a lot of networking, it all tends to happen outside the office over dinner and drinks. And, these are places, these are environments where, which are difficult for people with hearing loss, with background noise and, busy places. They were the places I was least comfortable, least able to be myself, so it was difficult. And I think on reflection, that was probably the one thing that held me back, that I found hard.
So that must have been a really difficult time, sort of trying to manage that environment that wasn't work alongside sort of your hearing loss. What were you thinking, feeling at that time?
Fear, probably. It was, is the emotion that springs to mind. It was a hard time to be a partner. I was made up in 2008, just a couple of months after the great financial crash, and it was a difficult time for the firm and the partnership, the economy as a whole. And I was pretty certain in my own mind, rightly or wrongly at the time, that if I showed any type of weakness or vulnerability, as a self-employed partner, that would be it for me, and I would be, the next one out the door. That all sort of built this sense of fear. I think it was all sort of part of the equation. And I say my response to that, my instinctive response was to work harder and fight and, make sure that didn't happen to me. In many ways, it encouraged all the wrong behaviours.
So you're in this period where your hearing declined. You've got this uncertainty sort of internally at work, and you're not reaching out for help, and you're sort of trying to keep this to yourself. What was it like day to day for you at that point?
I think the thing is, I was trying to manage everything so acutely. It was very difficult to relax, sort of particularly any networking event or drinks or dinner, even things like partners meetings, they all became a great stress. I was spending huge amounts of energy, just sort of worrying about them, which was exhausting. And in the day-to-day, I was experiencing a lot of, I think you now call microaggressions. I wouldn't have called them that at the time. I didn't really understand that is what they were. But, often the small things, usually unintentional, that just erode and destroy your sense of belonging and self-esteem. It'd be anything from an eye roll, a utter smirk if you don't hear, or just that feeling of being cut out of conversation or asking someone else the question instead of you because they think, you won't hear them. Just that perception of being ignored or overlooked for opportunities.
God. And what do you think were the lowest moments you were experiencing at that time?
Yeah, I mean, there were a few. It's hard, it's hard to pick, but one example would be we held a partners conference in London one year. Yeah, I think I sat through the first session and I was sat at the back of the room. There were no microphones or, and I just couldn't hear what anyone was saying. And I just thought, there's no point in me being here. And I walked out and got on a train and went straight back to Birmingham, went back to the office and, and carried on. And that was a pretty sad moment. And there were things, probably innocuous things people said without, realising that really hurt. A secretary said to me once, whatever happened to you used to be such a laugh. And I remember being speechless almost, what do you think's happened to me? Do I really need to sort of explain that? But it was just, I think what these comments were doing, they were reaffirming in my own mind, that feeling of that I was failing, that I'd lost myself, that it was my fault, my weakness, eroding, destroying that sense of self-confidence and self-esteem.
I can't even begin to imagine how those sort of things made you feel. And I think if we look at today in the firm, definitely that behaviour some of that behaviour you're describing, not only is it sort of unacceptable, but probably in some cases it would be sort of disciplinary. When these things were happening, what was your reaction at the time?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you. I think a lot of it was unacceptable. I think I would react differently now. But at the time, I was just paralysed by confusion and fear. And so I would generally say nothing. As I say, all these experiences, all they were doing was just really reinforcing that sense of that it was my fault, my problem. And so I think I just put myself through this sort of extreme level of stress every day for years.
I think stress is a really big issue in the legal sector. Hence why law firms, not just us, most law firms have got a focus on wellbeing and psychological safety.
Yeah, I mean, stress for lawyers, it's a particular problem that the profession is grappling with. I actually know that as a fact because I hear that from our insurers all the time. They're very concerned about the high levels of stress in the profession because of the damage that it can cause, and the insurers are very often on the receiving end of that. So they're very concerned about it. And I think, for lawyers, it's a particular problem because they are by their nature high achievers, conditioned to carrying on under great stress. By the very nature of the job they do. And I think almost the more you've achieved in life, the more you have to lose. And so your instinct is to fight and keep fighting long beyond the point where others would have sort of taken themselves out the firing line. So you keep going and it becomes this vicious circle. I never had a day off. I didn't feel like I could ever take a day off. I felt that if I had a day off, that would be it. I would lose control.
Did your hearing loss influence your decision to step away from partnership and then move into the General Counsel team?
I mean, very much so. I enjoyed what I'm describing for a long time, for many years. I'd like to think I was still successful during those years. I won an FT Innovative Lawyers Award, would you believe? At one stage, I was a leading individual for consumer credit in Legal 500 in the year that I retired. I always hit my financial targets. I say those things because it's important that people understand that having a disability, being unwell, doesn't go hand in hand with underperformance. But for me, it came at that personal cost. I felt that I was a shadow of the real me, the person that I actually was or should have been. I was actually diagnosed with severe depression and anxiety. And so, yes, it was very much influenced my decision to stop, but not just because of the physical barriers, but very much the sort of the emotional mental health side of the equation as well.
And was there any particular moment that triggered that decision to then move away from the partnership?
Yes, I would say yes and no. There was certainly what I now think was a sliding doors moment. You'll like this, Emma. I was one of the early pioneers of what was known as Enable, sort of early attempt at a networking group for people with disabilities in the firm. And I met a lady there called Lisa who works in HR. She doesn't work here anymore. She must have picked up on some of the things I said in one of the meetings. And she just reached out to me and she just asked me if I was okay. And luckily I replied I wasn't. And, actually over the next couple of years, she just created this safe space for us to chat and talk, and sort of build trust, perhaps trust that was lacking in other areas for me. And over a couple of years, it wasn't a quick thing, but we had on-off conversations very much at my pace. She just created a safe space where we could talk and build trust. And, and eventually we started talking about alternatives without any pressure on me at all to commit to anything. And I think that was key, really. She enabled me to make a decision that was actually in my best interest to make without pressurizing me to make that decision. She allowed me to reach my own conclusion. And so once I made the decision, which was sort of the easiest and hardest decision that I needed to ever make, it was then just a matter of time to organize a transition.
I think it's really important to create those safe spaces for people to talk and people to share, and particularly if you're struggling with something. And I've said this before, that bit of asking for help can make you feel really, really vulnerable. So an organisation needs to be able to create that trust to let people open up.
Yeah, I mean, for me, simply the act of speaking out loud to somebody in a safe environment was just this enormous relief. I can't describe it in any other way. I'd suppressed all these feelings for so long, and just to talk about them, and for somebody to understand, somebody actually to say it's not your fault, is just incredibly important. I had some counselling too outside of the firm. I learned a lot from that. I was told I was on the grief cycle, so I was actually grieving for my former self, if you like. And so going through all the classic stages of grief, denial, and I was very much in denial for a long time. Depression, bargaining, and acceptance. And it's a bit like snake and ladders, you move backwards, you move forward, you go up the ladder, you fall back down again. But over the long course, you hope you make progression. I'm still on the journey. I probably always still be, but simply being able to understand that you're on a journey is incredibly powerful.
Definitely. We're going to take a little break, but when we come back, we'll hear more about your experiences. I want to start part 2 with asking you, Greg, a few quick fire questions to get to know you a little bit more. You ready?
Sure.
What's the most used app on your phone?
I would say probably the weather.
What's one word your friends would use to describe you?
Calm is a word that comes up a lot, which I find ironic.
And what's a small thing that always makes you smile?
I would say Mabel, who is my dog.
Oh, what type of dog?
Cocker Spaniel, working cocker.
If you could instantly master one skill, what would it be?
Hearing, obviously.
What's your dream holiday destination?
Anywhere hot and sunny, so probably Hawaii.
Oh, nice. What's your go-to karaoke song?
I would probably say Summer of '69 by Bryan Adams.
Good choice. Do you do karaoke?
I do. I'm the closet karaoke fan, but don't tell anyone that.
And then a few more questions. Favourite smell?
Home.
Oh, I like that. Text or call?
Text.
Sunshine or snow?
Definitely sunshine, definitely. No hesitation.
Are you more an introvert or extrovert?
Introvert.
Pineapple on pizza, yes or no?
Yes, I had it last night.
Correct answer as well. And what was your first job?
I was a milkman, or I worked on a milk float, delivering milk, which makes me a milkman.
I miss milk floats and the noise they used to make.
Pint of silver top, can't go wrong.
So we were talking before the break on how your hearing loss impacted your decision to step away from partnership. Looking back now, do you think that was the right decision?
Yeah, definitely the right decision. I wouldn't change anything. I was lucky enough that I think by the time I retired, I was ready for it. I had absolutely no regrets. I said that at the time, which is a nice thing to be able to feel and say. And after I retired, I was demob happy for a while. I felt like the weight of the world was off my shoulders. People in the office started stopping me and saying, you look so happy, you look so well. And people never said things like that before, so I can only assume that I walk around looking pretty unhappy and grumpy, and I just had this realization. I felt like I'd lost the best part of a decade of my life, my 30s and early 40s, and I probably should have been in my prime. I now consider those to be lost years in many ways. I switched off from so many things. I now hear music and songs that that are simply from that era that I simply didn't know that it existed. TV programs, they completely passed me by. I can remember it was probably not long after I'd retired. There used to be a bit of a runner back in those days, and I was running off road somewhere, and I slipped in the mud, and I went flying, got absolutely plastered in mud. And I was on a non-working day, and I remember sitting there in the mud and just sort of, I just had this sense of lightness and sort of happiness, and I was smiling to myself, and that sort of realization, it was an emotion I hadn't felt for such a long time. It's those little things that there was absolutely no doubt in my mind that that I'd done the right thing, and it sort of transformed my life in many ways.
How are things different for you now?
Firstly, I have great colleagues. I'm surrounded by really good people. Many of them are more than colleagues, they're friends. A very understanding and supportive line manager. With these foundations, I can now be myself. I'm not wearing a mask to work anymore in the way that I did for many years. I feel I can lead again now, properly set the right examples by my actions, and actually just being open and honest about things that are not so great, challenging the firm, actually calling things out, which we're encouraged to do, in the genuine hope that actually, might genuinely benefit future generations coming through, as perhaps some people won't have to go through some of the experiences that I went through many years ago.
We've spoken before a lot around accessibility, and I wondered what adjustments or technologies have really helped you most in work.
I mean, you've been great, Emma. Your team have been great. I think that's something that's really changed actually a lot over the years, that people do go to great efforts now to make everything accessible, make reasonable adjustments, and technology has a huge role to play in that, increasingly so actually. So for me, the advent of Zoom and Teams is just a godsend really, with its ability to produce live transcripts. Now with Copilot, we have that ability to produce summaries, and you can instantly review a meeting, see what you've missed. So things like that have been incredibly helpful. But equally, what I would say is that be even more important than technology and buying things is just the importance of being a good friend, a good neighbour, a kind colleague, and looking out for people, and also being willing to adapt.
You mentioned the importance of trust earlier in your decision-making process. I just wanted us to go back to that. What lessons do you think you've learned?
I'm just touching on what you said before that. It sounds a bit twee, doesn't it? But I have learned that by making myself vulnerable, you can make other people brave. And I think there were definitely times when I wasn't talking, and internalizing things, and that wasn't healthy. And I always found it amazingly reassuring to hear other people speak about difficulties, and and there's that sort of sense of you're not the only one. In terms of lessons learned, the trust thing is something I'd come back to, that trust is huge. To be able to be vulnerable, to show weakness, you have to trust the people, you have to trust the environment. Without the trust, people won't come forward, and they won't be open, they won't be honest.
Definitely. I still remember the first time I met you. I think I've said this to you before, but I remember you sort of opened up to me, and we were in a meeting room somewhere, and you were talking about your experiences. And it's really funny, because if I look back to that, I never in a second would have thought that you would be sat here today doing this with me. And it's amazing how sort of time and you opening up about your experiences in different ways has sort of built up to this.
Yeah, I just remember something switched in me, and I felt ready to talk. And actually, it was one of the very best things that I ever did. Yeah. And I had so many people approach me privately afterwards to talk about themselves, not about me. But it was almost like I'd given them permission for them to say what they were worried about, what they were struggling with. Someone for other people to identify with, and it was incredible to be trusted by those people.
And how has the firm helped you?
I've been here 25 years now, Emma, would you believe? And I've mentioned the lady from HR, Lisa. She doesn't work here anymore, but I hope she gets to hear this podcast. She was just fantastic to me. As I say, she created that trust and that safe space. In the end, I think, led by Lisa, the firm went above and beyond what was necessary to redeploy me essentially into a different role, and to make that transition as easy as it could be. So Gowling has been very good to me, and if I may say so, I think I've been quite good for Gowling in a way as well.
I agree that you have been very good for Gowling, but I just wondered if you wanted to share some of the things that you've done and how you've impacted on the firm.
I guess what I mean is there probably aren't too many people in the firm, who've experienced life on both sides of the fence, as I call it. I think I do my job far better now for some of the experiences that I've had. So when I say, I think the firm has learned from me, I think I'm a case study in many ways. Not many people actually have the opportunity to bring different perspectives on things and ultimately make the firm a better place for future generations.
From my perspective, I really value your opinion on things. So when you share either your experiences and where things could be improved, or your input into the Enable Network over the years, and you sharing your story internally at the firm, has been really, really valuable to people. You're one of our wellbeing champions, and you have been for a number of years. I just wondered what led you to decide to take on that role.
I feel very passionate about helping other people. I feel very fortunate, very privileged to have come through some of my experiences. I've come to realise that I can pass on the benefit of that to others. I truly understand the importance of trust and creating safe spaces for people to talk, the Wellbeing Champions are a fantastic example of a way in which the firm is doing that. But most importantly, and whether you're a Wellbeing Champion or not, but everybody in the firm, every manager, every leader, every colleague needs to step up and make themselves available people to create the environments where people can be open and honest and talk. It's good to talk.
How do you feel that all of your experiences have influenced your leadership style?
I think indirectly, probably I'm a far better leader now than I was or would have been without some of the experiences. I think come back to trust. Trust and openness is the foundation really of what we stand for as a profession, how we interact day to day. But when you're managing people, it's absolutely everything can have profoundly positive impacts on people's lives. I don't think that could be underestimated. It's a superpower. As a manager and a leader, you have the ability to change people's lives for the better, and that's an amazing thing. So I think what I've learned is the importance of talking to your people, asking how they are, you're taking an interest in them. And it's so simple to do, and I just think everybody should do it. And it's surprising how many people don't do it. But as a manager or a leader, is just to ask people the simple question: how can I help you do your job better? What do you need from me? As a result, you get really committed, loyal, high-performing people because they can be themselves and they can be open and they can be honest without worry and fear.
With my role, I'm obviously always talking about the importance of diverse teams and what that brings to workplaces. I just wanted to ask, how important are diverse teams to you? What's your view on the importance of diversity within teams, whether that's different experiences, perspectives?
Teams are really interesting. I think I can spot what's a healthy and high-performing team these days. It's everybody playing to their strengths, everybody doing their bit, not one person trying to control everything or do everything themselves. In a highly functioning team where everybody's just playing their role, the team becomes greater than the sum of its parts. I think diverse teams will perform better than others, but diversity alone is not enough. There has to be inclusion. Without inclusion, you don't get team playing and you don't get team performance.
So a really important point, I think something we've really focused on the last few years is that inclusion piece with our Inclusion for All strategy. Because you're right, you can have the most diverse team in the world, but if nobody feels included, it means absolutely nothing.
Someone clever came up with a quote, didn't they? Diversity is being asked to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance.
You mentioned allies earlier on, and I know this is something that you feel quite strongly about, so I wanted just to pull back round to that point of the importance of allies.
Being an ally is not a badge, it's not a lanyard, but it's actually using your voice and advocating actively for others. If I go out for a drink or dinner with my colleagues these days and they will say, where's best for you to sit, before taking a seat themselves. It's a really little thing, but that's what an ally does. It's because they're thinking about other people. A former colleague of mine, she was my boss actually for a number of years. She was really brilliant in meetings. If we had a meeting and somebody was speaking very quietly, or he turned up to a virtual meeting and not wearing their microphone, I'd ask them to speak up. She'd say, I can't hear what you're saying. And I knew perfectly well she could, and she was doing it for my benefit. That's what a real ally does, isn't it? They don't draw attention to it, but they quietly advocate.
Definitely. I think allies play a really critical part when you're sort of going through something, and because you get sick of having to say the same thing over and over again, and to have someone else's voice come in trying to make things better, I think is really important. What would your advice be to anybody that's listening to this who might find themselves really identifying with your story?
I guess I've talked about a sense of self-esteem, self-worth, and there's a bit of ego tied up in this as well. And I think probably one of the things I came to realise for myself, and I saw it in other people, is just how important that sense of self-worth and ego is. And I've had to lose the ego, and that's quite a large leap to make. And I think for some people, I think that's probably one of the hardest things. I think I always looked around in the partnership and saw people who were maybe unhappy but they couldn't imagine a life not doing what they were doing because it was so central to their sense of self-esteem and self-worth and ego. And so I think my advice would probably be to lose the ego and understand what good looks like for you and measure your success against that, and not what other people are doing or not what other people have achieved, but what is good for you.
Yeah, it's a really good piece of advice. I don't think anybody is happy if you're comparing yourself to others. I think it has to be what works for you. What advice would you give to other professionals that are navigating hearing loss?
I mean, I'd have to be honest and say, it's hard. It's really hard, and you wouldn't want to dress that up and pretend it isn't. I suddenly wouldn't want anyone listening to this to think that life's perfect now and easy, because it isn't. But I would say my advice to others is surround yourself with the right people. We talked about teamwork and the importance of being in a functional team. It's much easier to advocate for yourself if you're within the right environment, within the right team. You have colleagues who you can trust and who you know will help you. So that's my advice, really. Surround yourself with good people and be honest. And if you can't be honest, it probably means you're in the wrong place. And so you need to try and get yourself into the right place, into the right environment, the right firm, the right team, whatever it would be. And finally, I would say play to your strengths. That's so important. For me, I'm acutely aware of what I'm good at, and I'm acutely aware of what I'm not good at. And generally, I try and avoid what I'm not good at now. And I'm honest about it. And I say, give that to someone else. Let someone else do that. I'll stick to what I'm good at and let other people do what I'm not so good at. And that's what a team's for.
What would you tell Greg in 2010 now if you could speak to him?
Oh, that's a really difficult question. Well, obviously, Emma, I would say in 2025, you're going to be asked to record a podcast with Emma, and you'll be talking about all these things with a smile on your face, which is something I never would have believed back then. I guess I'd say, look, you'll travel some difficult roads, but you'll get there eventually. You'll get support. You'll be able to trust people again. You'll perform well in your role. And, I guess you'll rediscover that inner confidence. And as I said earlier, the things that put you in the position that you were in the first place. A massive thank you, Greg, for joining me today and for sharing your story and your insights. We really appreciate it. Thank you, Emma. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you for having me. We'll be back with a new episode to get to know more talented people here at Gowling WLG. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and have a wonderful week.